Niall, what's in your notes?
Well, Robbie, I hadn't expected to be turning back to Israel and Gaza today, but I hadn't expected to see images of people being burnt alive this week either. Nor did I think there would be some sign finally that the Biden-Harris administration might do something about it. But I stress might. It's equally possible the President and Vice President are making a move of breathtaking cynicism. Here's where we are right now. In the early hours of Monday, Israeli forces struck a hospital complex in the central Gaza city of Deir Al-Balah. 4 people were killed. The airstrike ignited fires in nearby tents. Words really cannot do justice to what happened next. A 17-year-old who lost his brother spoke with CBC, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. Mohammed Ahmed Al-Dalou said he was sleeping in a tent outside the hospital when he heard the airstrike. Quote, "I went out to see what happened and I found my brother burning in the fire," Mohammed said. "My brother had both his hands up to the sky." Mohammed's brother Shaban was 20 years old. He was burned alive. CBC noted the video footage of Shaban's death was widely available on social media, but that it was just too graphic for the broadcaster to share. The Israelis have said the airstrike targeted a militant command centre adjacent to the hospital. Perhaps they'll provide proof of that claim, but so far they haven't. Now here's the other part of the story. In a letter that became public yesterday, Secretary of State Tony Blinken and Secretary of Defence Lloyd Austin warned Israel that it has to let more humanitarian aid into Gaza or risk US weapons finally being cut off. Blinken and Austin laid out specific measures that the Israelis must take within 30 days. Unfortunately, the US has a history of threatening Middle Eastern leaders with red lines that soon fade into oblivion. But this time, the administration's red lines include allowing more aid trucks into Gaza. In northern Gaza, the civilian population has been ordered to evacuate by the IDF, but they say they have nowhere to go, and some people report coming under fire when they try to move. Food coming in has slowed to the tiniest of trickles. On Monday, 4 human rights groups in Israel pleaded with the international community to take action. The Israeli groups said there were, quote, alarming signs that their government was starting to implement what is known as the General's Plan, a blueprint those groups characterized as, quote, a complete, forcible transfer of the civilians of the northern Gaza Strip through tightening the siege on the area and starving the population. Such a tactic would, of course, be a flagrant war crime. The Israeli military denies it's happening. So can America force a change in course? Certainly, if Biden and Harris are serious. And there's the question. The Biden administration has paused only a single arms shipment to Israel over this past year, and American military aid to Israel since the heinous Hamas attacks of last October 7th has amounted to almost $18 billion. That's according to a recent study from Brown University. On a Sunday, the very day the Blinken-Austin letter was written, the Biden administration said it would send an advanced air defense system to Israel, along with 100 American troops to operate it. One more thing. Kamala Harris was in Michigan yesterday. It was the first of 3 visits she has scheduled this week to the state with the highest concentration of Arab Americans in the nation. Michigan is one of the 7 key states that will decide this election, and more than 200,000 Arab Americans live there. A narrow polling lead that Harris enjoyed in August has been wiped out. Donald Trump now leads by a sliver. So you see, there's a problem with the administration's 30-day time frame on Gaza, and it's an obvious one to anyone who looks at a calendar. It places the deadline for Israeli compliance beyond the presidential election. Maybe Biden and Harris and Blinken and Austin have all had a change of heart about their previously ironclad support for Israel. Or maybe they want to give those Americans who are outraged about atrocity after atrocity the appearance that things are changing, without actually committing to any change at all. Once November the 5th passes, this administration could be on its way out. Or a President-elect Harris could decide, with the votes safely in the bag, that Israel has just done enough, again, to keep the guns and bombs flowing. If that's the plan, it's cynical and ruthless. But when it comes to the Middle East, there's plenty of ruthless cynicism to go around.
Yes, indeed, and it has certainly gotten to a point where the administration, again, they want to at least signal, they want to suggest to their base that they do not find the situation in Gaza to be acceptable and that they want to put some kind of restraint on what Israel is doing, which we're seeing these images. They're horrific. Thank you for reporting on them and discussing them. No one wants to see Palestinian children, innocent, being burned alive. It's just unconscionable, and it's there's no end to it in sight. But the question is the administration actually going to do something about it? That's not clear. The rhetoric is getting more aggressive. What Tony Blinken's had to say is more aggressive, but again, I'm not seeing an actual change in policy. Ultimatums, we've had ultimatums before. Netanyahu walks right over that line, and there's no follow-through.
Right, exactly, Robbie. And there was a similar situation back earlier this year when the administration put pressure on the Israelis to let aid in. That request was granted temporarily or briefly. Aid then started being blocked once again after a certain determination had been made to allow US weaponry to keep flowing. And you're right, I mean, it does get to the point of, is this some genuine shift, or is it an election and vote-winning tactic? And if it's a vote-winning tactic, it's really an extraordinarily cynical one. I mean, to make political use of a situation as dire as this is really unconscionable, to use a word that you used a few seconds ago. So that's the big question. And I suppose the other related question is, will this work if it is indeed a political gambit? We mentioned there Harris slipping behind in Michigan, which I know is your home state. There is, I think, if she were to lose that, it's one of the blue wall states. If she loses there, it's very troublesome for her. But is it just trying to sort of buy voters off there without really promising any significant or substantive change in policy?
Yeah, my big question is whether we would get a change in policy if Donald Trump, does win the election. He's not said anything very specifically about it. He clearly knows this is a losing issue for the Democrats. I think he is enjoying watching Democratic leaders like Kamala Harris and Joe Biden reckon with the fact that their pretty ironclad support of Israel's war is costing them some vote, that they're between a rock and a hard place, that it's costing them votes among progressives, among Arab Americans, but they can also very easily isolate more pro-Israel people in the party, and that it's very difficult for them to proceed and keep the coalition together. Trump's loving that and doesn't want to find himself in the same place, so he's just saying nothing about it. You might have the same policy, you might have an even more aggressively pro-Israel policy. I don't think it's out of question that you would have a less pro-Israel policy as well. There are elements in the GOP who want to do that, and Trump has no personal love for Netanyahu, given Netanyahu's at one time close relationship with Joe Biden, so it remains to be seen. And Trump is a little bit of a foreign policy iconoclast, even as he has in the past surrounded himself with people in the Republican Party who, proceed business as usual, continuity, kind of no matter who's in charge, which I actually think is a shame.
Yeah, no, I mean, he has. I mean, he did move the US embassy, and he has been broadly rhetorically supportive of Israel. But there's always a question of what exactly Trump is going to do. And he has suggested that Israel needs to sort of stop this at some point. Now, whether he means stop it by just blasting the Palestinians into oblivion or stop it is unclear. But yeah, it is, I think, a legitimate shadow of doubt over that.
Well, coming up next, Nancy Pelosi is persona non grata in Biden land. We're going to dig into that. There'll be more Rising right after this.